we knew that we won't be able to leave the country. I mean, we know that we have to be here for all our lives. Didn't foresee any changes to the regime. It seemed so rock solid.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Zsolt Akos Pall was born in a small town in the Hungarian-speaking part of Romania. For ordinary people, life in Romania in the 1980s was very hard, and it could be even worse if you were part of the Hungarian Szekler minority, since the communist government persecuted this Hungarian minority. They even made them change their Hungarian names into Romanian. Zsolt's brother was renamed from Istvan to Stefan. However, Zsolt was baptised Zsolt since there was no Romanian equivalent to it. Zsolt describes the shortages, his schooling and many other stories of life during this period. We end the episode with Zsolt's plans to escape to Sweden. Don't miss part 2. Now, Cold War history is disappearing. However, a simple monthly donation will help to keep this podcast on the air. You'll get the sought-after Cold War Conversations coaster as a thank you, and you'll bask in the warm glow of knowing that you are helping to preserve Cold War history.
Hi, I'm Andrew, and I'm very proud to support Cold War Conversations with a small donation each month, because Ian's put together such a brilliant range of interviews. If you want high power, there's the son of Nikita Khrushchev, there are cross-border romances, old-fashioned spy stories, and the bizarre world of East European football. If you do support the podcast, your wallet will be a tiny bit lighter, but your brain will be very, very thankful.
Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If you're on Facebook, do join our Facebook discussion group where listeners just like you continue the Cold War conversation. Just search for Cold War Conversations on Facebook. I'm delighted to welcome Zsolt Akos Pall to our Cold War conversation.
I was born in 1969 in Transylvania, which is a part of today's Romania, in a small town, which in Hungarian is called Kézdivásárhely. In Romanian is called Târgu Secuiesc, and it has a German name as well, Neumarkt.
Who was in your immediate family?
Well, my immediate family was my father, my mother, and I had an older brother as well.
And what did your parents do for employment?
Well, my father was a tailor, and my mother was a seamstress. They worked on the same place, so to say, and my father was her boss.
Okay. Is that how they met?
No, it's not how they met. That's a little bit the longer story, because at that time when my father's parents, my grandfather, they were classed as wealthy peasants or wealthy citizens, so-called kulaks.
Yeah.
And when communism came, they were classed as enemy of the regime, basically. Which meant that the sons and the daughters of these class enemy people, they couldn't attend university, they couldn't get a decent job. So my father had to leave the town where he was born, because in the town he couldn't get any employment. So what he did is that he went around in big cities in Transylvania, turning in his application for the jobs, and he got response first time from a northern Transylvanian town, Nagyvárad, Grossvartány, Oradea, and then he went there for work. On the same account, there was as well a famine in Transylvania. So from many villages down in Transylvania, in this Szekler county, families were forced to abandon or to give up their sons and daughters for them to be able to go to the richer places of Transylvania, not to be able to survive. So in this way, my mother was given away to this northern part of Transylvania, and they met there in Nagyvárad.
Right. When you say given away, you mean
we had some kind of relatives in that other part of the country, and they just
adopted your mother.
Adopted more or less, so to say, but not only my mother, but two other sisters of her as well. And in those days, it was very usual that families had many children. Like my father had 9 other sisters and brothers. My mother had 11. So they were big families in that way, and it was hard to feed everybody, certainly when it was a famine.
Understood. What sort of accommodation were you living in the town you were in?
Yeah, well, we were from part of the, how should I say, the well-off people. I mean, since my grandfather was well off at their time off, I mean, what he did is he was buying house for every children he had. For example, so we were living in a 2-story houses in Kézdivásárhely. We had a car. I mean, we had pretty much the possibilities which we were able to get in those times.
Were you told to not talk about certain things outside the family group?
Well, not really. Not really, because one understand it that we shouldn't. I mean, basically by myself or something. It's a very, how should I say, delicate situation in that way that on the surface, everything was okay. Everything was functioning there. Post offices, cinemas, theater, hospitals, people went to work and everything functioned. But deep down, everybody understood and felt that something is wrong. Something is not normal. Something is out of time, in a way. So people were very cautious in this way, and we didn't really talk about politics openly. I mean, we had a lot of jokes about it as well, because one have to cope somehow with this absurd situation. It's like, I just tell you a joke about this feeling. It's like 2 people are standing in the bus stop, and one is spitting, and the other said to him that you shouldn't make politics here. Okay, so that kind of feeling that we are not talking about it, but everybody knows what's the situation. We're so intimidated in a way by the whole structure that this self-protection somehow was very strong, because we know what it happened. I mean, you had that guy in Prague, who burned himself.
Yeah, Jan Palach.
Jan Palach. We had a Jan Palach in Transylvania as well in the 60s, but since but nobody knows about it, so to say, because the media and the communication, everything was very, very strictly controlled, and we had certain revolts here and there in some fabric here, for some kind of industry town or here and there. But you couldn't know about it because everything was instantly cut down, so to say. And people were put to jails and so on and so on. So everybody was very self-aware of when talking, what talking, to whom, and so on. Yeah, the Securitate, that the state, the secret police was very, very effective in that way. And it was a normal thing that the phones were tapped, and even in certain eminent people's houses. So if you were if you were a writer or a known doctor or someone, a known intellectual, they would monitor him very closely, what he's doing, whom he's talking to, whom he's meeting, and so on and so on. So we were very cautious in our everyday being.
And I guess an additional complication for you was being part of the Hungarian minority in Romania.
Well, yes and no. Yes, because we were, how should I say, officially treated as a second-level citizens or something like that, So it's it was that. But on the other hand, since in our hometown when I was growing up, it's a small town, about 18,000, 20,000 people. I mean, I don't know the official numbers, but I guess there were not more than, let's say, 500 Romanians or so. So the city was Hungarian, basically. So I didn't really, if you went out to the streets and so ever, it was just Hungarians all around it. There was no Romanians, basically. So the Romanians were the people who were put there to be there, like teachers to the schools who were teaching Romanian, or for engineers to the new industry plants, and so on and so on. What they did actually to turn around the situation is it was like they were building factories in KSD, and to the factories they were building a housing neighborhood as well. And local people couldn't really work in these factories. Later on they could, but in the first instance they were taking over Romanian people from Moldova and Wallachia, the other Romanian regions of Romania, real Romanians, so to say, and they were taking over to Transylvania, and they had to work there and they had to live there. It was a way to mix people, so to say. So that's how we got our Romanian neighbors and later friends as well, because they came, and we became good friends with the Romanians. I mean, basically on the human to human level, I could speak for myself. I never ever had a problem with a Romanian person.
Yeah, I guess you both had the same challenges, and the subject I wanted to get onto was your experience of shortages in Romania.
Yeah, well, in the beginning, I can't remember any shortages, when I was a kid. That's until until I got more conscious about these things, until I was 8, 9, 10 years old. My shortages was that I could see, of course, I liked football very much, and I saw some matches, and I always liked the German teams and the English team and the Spanish teams and the Italian teams. And, I could always see that how nice, big, fancy, colorful pictures they were having out of them. And some of my friends at that time, and even me, we could order Kika magazine and all kinds of football magazines. And they had a very different quality than anything we known in Romania before. So we felt directly this kind of difference between our lifestyles. And then, of course, after 1 or 2 years, all the foreign press, all foreign things were prohibited. So that went out. I mean, the culture was getting suffocated in this way more and more. That the freedom of being able to know of other countries and to getting information, and little by little, because the whole economy, basically what we had, it was a falsely generated economy, not depending on real needs. It started we started to get real shortages, like on the primer level, like shortage in food, shortage in energy, and so on. So yes, we had those shortages as well when we get a ticketing system that everybody was given a half liter of oil every month, or 200 grams of butter, and so on and so on.
Right, so it's rationing.
Yeah, yes, it came more and more. But since this is a mostly, how should I say, Transylvania is a very depending on agriculture, and it's not so big industrialized regions, and certainly not my hometown. And certainly we had relatives in the countryside, and from there we could get supplies of meat and basically everything else as well.
So yeah, what you're saying there is sort of like in your childhood, Romania didn't appear too bad, but as you became a teenager and getting into the 1980s, that's when Ceausescu was trying to pay off all the foreign debt.
Yes, of course.
Which then impacted the Romanian economy and caused the shortages. So were you experiencing power cuts and things like that at the time?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, of course. It was an everyday thing. I mean, for instance, when I was in high school there, was about like 16 years old. Then, for instance, every evening we had the electricity went off. Like, I don't know, like 7 o'clock and until like 12 o'clock to the midnight. We had no electricity during the nights. I remember that very clearly because until 6 to 7 we went to ice skating, and then after it, when all the electricity was down, then we gathered in local pubs and had a beer and then went home early.
Yeah. So you knew when the power cuts were going to be, did you?
Oh, we knew when the power cuts going to be, and certainly people living in block houses were in much worse situation because it meant that they didn't had any heating on. It meant that they didn't had any hot water. So having the bathtub, filling it with hot water, it was an everyday thing. You tapped up the water when it was hot water, and you used it, and several members of the family was bathing in the same water because then it was nothing else later on.
You learn to work around that situation as best you can, but every account I've heard has indicated that life in Romania in 1980s for many people was very difficult because of those shortages and what you've just described.
Oh, absolutely. And these shortages, how should I say, or these electric cuts and so on. So they were so stupid as well in a way, because, for instance, in the local factory, they were in production of something. They cut the electricity, of course, and all that material they had in the manufacturing line, they went wrong. Of course, they had to throw it out everything. So in a way, they, of course, were sparing electricity, but on the same way, we were producing a lot of unused material. And basically. So it was a stupid, in a way, it was a stupid sparing program. It produced a lot of waste.
And what was your schooling like? What was it like at school?
Well, normally, in the elementary school, and later on, it was just normal classes. We didn't had any differentiations in the classes. It was just normal classes until the eighth class, and from 8th to the 9th degree, when we were stepping over to we called it gymnasium or lyceum, the lyceums, we need to have an entrance test. And there you could go to different profiles. You could go to natural sciences. You could go to more human lines, so to say. But by the time I was getting there to make my entrance test, there was no more human lines.
You mean humanities?
Humanities, yes. No more literature, no more languages. those classes were simply shut down, and all what we could have was one class of natural sciences. It was called mathematics, physics. We had one class of electromechanics, I think, and we had one class of industrial chemistry, and we had 5 or 6 classes of mining geology or something like that. So those were the only ones which you could choose from, so to say. And then, of course, the goal was to get in the best class, and then we'll see what's going to happen later. So I went there to this mathematics physics class for 3 years until 1986. And then in the summer of 1986, I jumped the borders to Sweden.
We'll come on to that in a moment. I just want to ask you a little bit more about your school life and life at home. Was there a lot of propaganda in your teaching?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because it was compulsory. I mean, everybody, we had the slogans, we had the Ceausescu's pictures in every classroom. We have mottos of him around, and there was compulsory political classes which you have to attend. And, so that was the compulsory one. On the other hand, our teachers, they were, thank God they were normal people. So we were sitting in the same boat. So they understood as well. And, they were not doing more than they had to do, so to say. And of course, they didn't like the regime either. So it's even those who were politically active because of their situation, even though they knew that this is not this is not a normal life. If you allow me just one thought about this communism and maybe to understand it a little bit better. This is how my father told me that when he was a kid, the local people in KSD, they were grouped, the local industry people, they were grouped into so-called guilds. So everybody, the tailor had a guild, and the shoe manufacturing people had guild, and every profession was structured into guilds. Those people who were not good enough to make into these guilds, they were either were not even taken in, or they were expelled later on, because either they were not good in their craft, or they were not good in ethics, and so on. So all these people, and being a small town, everybody knew everyone. And when the new regime came, so to say, the communism came, all the who were willing to serve the new system was these so-called expelled people. So from the very beginning, it was doomed to unsuccess, so to say, because they were not trusting each other at all. They knew each other. They knew who was who. And certainly these new guys who became the new party secretaries and officials and everything else, they were very revengeful as well. It was a total failure for the very first moment, and it resulted in very many tragic stories and of course injustice and so on and so on. And later on, when we were kids, the normal classes of the town, they were okay, so to say, like our teachers and the normal common people. They were normal people with normal ethics and, sincerity and honesty and so forth. But the high level was always very corrupted, and this corruption, unfortunately, then went down through the society, and little by little, pretty much most of the people were corrupt, because that was the only way to, let's say, buy a liter of milk at the end.
Understood. I'm presuming you were in the Young Pioneers as well.
Yes, it was compulsory, of course. I mean, you couldn't be outside.
What did that mean, being in the Young Pioneers? What did you have to do?
Well, basically, we had some chants to sing, and we had some meetings we had to attend, and that, but not more, so to say. It wasn't a very serious movement anyhow. It was compulsory. You had to go there, and that's it.
So you just did what you had to do.
Yeah. I mean, it was no argument, and everybody was in it anyhow. I mean, you couldn't stay outside, basically. I mean, you didn't have that choice that, I think different of life, so I'm not going to be part of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a question.
It wasn't going to be a good move if you went down that route.
On the other hand, I remember now that we are talking about, we had the Pioneers' House, which was kind of like a cultural house, a crafts house. And there we had very good studying circles. For instance, we could drive go-karts. You know, we had a teacher, and we could fiddle with the mechanics of an engine and so forth. So it was quite fun. And we had in this way we could have there were ballet lessons, for instance, which was taught otherwise as a decadent Western culture movement. So we shouldn't have ballet in Romania. But since it was a kids movement and the Pioneers House class, I mean, they could teach ballet in this way. And we had a literature circle, and we have ship modeling circle, and different handcrafts and so on. And I personally, I was we had a photo circle. We were learning how to make photographs, how to develop them. We were making small films, and so it was in that way very good as well. Although it was called as well as the Pioneers movement.
And did you take many photos at that time?
Well, we did. Yes, we did. We had, I remember we had the Smena machines, which was a Russian photo machine, which was not bad.
Do you still have some of those, or are they lost?
I still have them somewhere. Yes, I still have them somewhere.
No, there must be an interesting sort of view into that period, I guess.
Yes, it is. And then we have, in the city, we had a photo club as well. So, and then they were, I mean, the cultural life was not bad in that meaning that since nobody could travel, everybody was home. So all the people were home, and you know, creativity is still there. I mean, life is still there, although you're living in a dictatorship. But still, if you have those urges or those wishes to accomplish something or to do something, we could have that. I was playing in a amateur theater group as well, and there were bands, even rock bands, which played music, and we had photo clubs and all kinds of things. So culturally, it wasn't a bad situation.
Yeah, well, that sort of leads on, because I was going to ask you what you did in your spare time when you weren't in the Young Pioneers or at school.
Well, mostly we were playing football. That's what it was. I mean, we finished class normally at 2:00 in the afternoon, and then we either stayed on in the school and played football for another 2-3 hours, or went out to the park and played on, and then certainly went to this Pioneer House, and went to the cinemas, went to the theaters. Yeah. Of course, the cinemas would not play the latest movies, and so, but they could play Western movies, for instance, or some European movie films. So yeah, we have seen certain things.
Yeah, because I've heard about trading Western movies on VHS cassettes in Romania.
Oh yeah, that came later. Yes, that came later when VHS was making its way. And yes, funnily enough, I mean they somehow they didn't prohibit it. I thought it's gonna be a total prohibition of VHS players, but they did not. And yeah, the problem was that you couldn't buy a VHS player. There was none in the shops. And you couldn't buy VHS tapes either. So the solution was that there were so-called dollar shops, which were open in big cities only for the foreigners who came to Romania, and they could buy stuff. Because normally a Romanian citizen was not allowed to have any valuta, any money outside the Romanian lei. But these people who came from abroad, they could buy stuff, and certainly those people as well who were working abroad, like truck drivers or anybody else who was out working in a different country, they could buy these goods, and they were taking back. And then, of course, little by little, it became available on the black market as well. But officially, in the beginning, you couldn't buy any of these things.
I guess the VHS films was maybe thought of as a safety valve.
Yeah, probably. And since we had in the neighboring countries like Hungary was well off compared to Romania, and Hungary was a bit freer in many ways. And then so people could either take officially over and pay taxes on it, or smuggle over it, or come around it in some way. That I remember one of my teachers, Romanian teacher, Norel Mariana, had a VHS player, since his husband was working in Italy at the time, and he brought home a VHS. So in my teacher's living room, we were gathering every night, like 6 to 8 people, and we're watching different films. I remember I saw Rambo there first. So, yeah, so okay, I was 16 at the time, but just to underline that we had so good connection, or we were in so good, not really friendship, but in so close proximity to our teachers, that they invited us, their students, to come over our place and see the movies.
Tell me about your brother and his journey.
Well, my brother was born in Oradea, in Nagyvárad, in this northern Transylvanian city where my father and my mother met, and they wed, and they were living there for a good couple of years. And my brother was born there. And then in 1968, my father and my mother decided to move back to Kézdivásárhely. And so my brother as well, since he was, 6-7 years at the time. And they moved back, but he never really liked this Székely region. He was always he felt that he was a part of Nagyvárad rather than Kézd. Life was a bit rougher in this Szekler region. So basically he had this urge to go from Kézdi from very early on. And when I become so old or mature that I could understand, we're sometimes talking, and he said that, no, I'm not going to live here. I'm going to go from here. And he was not really coping. He was not really coping good with this dictatorship either, and that kind of society, which was. So he was very determined to go. Basically, that's the ground of it. And at that time, I mean, you couldn't really leave officially Romania. I mean, we didn't had a passport, or we couldn't freely travel. What we could do is every second year we could stay abroad 30 days if approved. It wasn't sure that it's going to be approved. And staying abroad, it meant the brother socialist countries. It meant Hungary, it meant Czechoslovakia, it meant Poland, Deutsche Demokratische Republic, and in some cases Bulgaria, and sometimes Yugoslavia. And sometimes only on organized tours you could go to the Soviet Union. And basically that was it. So the only official way, basically, to leave the country was by getting married with a foreign citizen. So that's what happened as well. There was a Hungarian tourist group some girls who were hitchhiking through Transylvania, and my brother met one of these girls, and I think they fell in love as well. So it was. So he decided then, okay, I'm gonna get married and I'm gonna go abroad, and this is basically what he did. Of course, many people. It wasn't a straightforward thing to do it. I mean, it would take several years. It would take several rides down to the capital, to Bucharest. It would take, you had to pay off, I don't know, a lot of officials just to be able to put forward your application, and so on and so forth. So and you could be, buzzed by the security police as well, that you want to go abroad? Why do you want to go abroad? It's not good enough for you here, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe you're not going to get abroad, and so on and so forth. Blackmailing was from the officials were very common. But he was perseverant on this, and he managed to get the papers, the paperwork on it. So he moved over to Hungary. And then from Hungary, later on, he moved over to Sweden. But it was kind of an example for me, because when I saw that he was actually going away and he was successful in his wish to leave, then it kind of set an example for me to as well, that it is possible. Because until that, our normal everyday thinking, we knew that we won't be able to leave the country. I mean, we know that we have to be here for all our lives. We didn't see, and we certainly didn't foresee any changes to the regime. It seemed so rock solid. It seemed so secured that we, in our lifetime, we didn't thought it's going to change.
Yeah, it must have seemed like it was going to go on forever.
Yes, it seemed like that.
So what do you plan then? How do you attempt to escape?
I really didn't plan that much. Or should I say, I didn't plan at all. In '86, my brother came home from Budapest, and we're about to go with him to Budapest. The whole family were planning this vacation, and I had one more reason to go, is that because before it I had a girlfriend in KSD, and they defeated to Sweden 2 years before it, and now this wonderful person was coming back to Budapest. And so basically my brother came home to KSD to fetch me to be able to meet her. And it was a lot of stories and how we managed to get the passports and so on. But we finally managed, and I went out to Budapest and we met. And, but even though, it was like, even though it was my first love, and, I couldn't even think about it to go out to the West. I mean, how could I? I couldn't jump the border just like that. I mean, normally you would be shot. Even if let's say I was jumping the border, but how could I, I didn't know anybody in the Western. So where should I go? How should I survive? And many times, like if you were defeating to Yugoslavia, many times they were giving you back to the East, and then you ended up in correction centers and so forth. Good couple of friends of mine. So that happened to them.
It sounds like it was difficult to get passports even to go to Hungary.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was difficult. It was very difficult. I mean, it took many working hours just to collect the paper. They needed all kinds of paperwork, that you couldn't have any debts to anyone. You couldn't have any illnesses. You could, all kinds of paperwork. So it wasn't easy to get it. To put it together, the documentation, and then you have to submit it, and then you had to go to interviews, and then, either they approved it or not. And then, so being there in Budapest, we said goodbye with this girl, and she went back to Sweden, and I remained in Hungary, and I was planning, of course, to, after the 30 days, go back to my hometown. And I still had 1 year in high school. And afterwards, I wanted to become an actor. And so those were my goals. So that was the situation. And then at that time as well, my brother left for Sweden as well. Officially, of course, he could go officially from Hungary to Sweden. And he went out to Sweden, and I called him on the phone. How are you? Journey went good. You're nice. Okay, yeah, everything was good. And then he mentioned that it might be a way for me to follow him. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, it might be a way if I don't want to tell you to come or whatever, just think about it. It might be a way. Well, thank you, but I don't really want to go to the West. I mean, what should I do there? I mean, I just didn't see. It didn't. It wasn't in my plans at all. I had work to do back home in case, I had one here, and then I wanted to enter university and be an actor. I mean, how can I be an actor in the West world? I mean, I don't know languages. I know a little English and Romanian and Hungarian, but what can I do with those languages in the West? And so I said, yeah, you're nice. So thank you, but I'm not interested. And then I put down the phone. And then a couple more days went by, and we phoned again, and he mentioned it again. That there is, and I still said no, because, I mean, how would I do it? And then one night in Budapest, I met a friend of mine from KSD. I didn't know he was there either. And somehow through him, we ended up in a party. And at this party, we had a couple of beers and some wine and so on and so on. And we were afterwards, we were in the city, walking around, talking, and remember sitting on the Danube shore and talking lies. And then I started thinking about going abroad. And I flipped a coin. And I said, well, if it's this side, I'm going to go. If it's the other side, I'm going to stay.
There's further information such as photos and videos in our episode notes, which will show as a link in your podcast app. Now, this podcast would not exist without our financial supporters, and I want to thank one and all of them for their generous support. If you want to help us, just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate for more information. And you can also join our Facebook group where listeners just like you continue the Cold War conversation. Thanks very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye. Thanks for listening right through to the end. I really appreciate it. And maybe check out our store and see if you can find the ideal gift for the Cold War enthusiast in your life. Just go to coldwarconversations.com/store. Thanks for listening.